In this section, we'll talk about one of the most incredible stories and provide some food for thought as to whether life might exist elsewhere or even whether life began on or was brought to Earth. The start of life, biogenesis. It's the proverbial chicken or egg type of question. However, you must remember and hopefully begin to appreciate in Bio 1 that however incredible it is, this action of life is nothing more than a very specialized set of chemical reactions that allows things like metabolism, growth, and development to happen. So although much more complex, the actions that go on inside our bodies, our physiology, are simply chemical reactions. Therefore, to understand the beginning of life, we need to investigate the role chemistry played in all of that. Now, this slide is by no means the entire story or even the completely accurate story of that process of when non-living became living. The sequence of steps you see here provide a basic framework and processes scientists suggest may have happened on Earth. The types of molecules which are suggested to have been necessary for life include a type you studied quite a bit in Bio 1, that is, organic molecules. Recall, organic molecules contain carbon and generally hydrogen. Examples include all those types of organic molecules you studied in Bio 1, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Glucose, C6H12O6, is an organic molecule, as are amino acids. They all contain carbon and hydrogen. Methane, CH4, is also an organic molecule. We know from our Bio 1 lessons how vital organic molecules are for living organisms. And remember how diverse, think variation here, assemblages of organic molecules can be. Think proteins here. Then how do we go from simple organic molecules to larger, more complex ones? Hopefully you remember that would be involving chemical reactions in which monomers are connected to create polymers, dehydration and condensation synthesis. And from Bio 1 again, and the laws of thermodynamics, you can't make simple into complex without energy. Also, don't forget oxidation and reduction. Yes, they have to do with the movement of electrons. Losing an electron is oxidation, while gaining one is reduction. But in the context we're discussing, they also involve tearing down, oxidation, and building up, reduction of molecules. The Earth's atmosphere today is about 20% oxygen, necessary for life, but also an oxidizing or tearing up type of element. Oxidation is what rusts iron and what helps destroy the finish on the paint on your car. Oxidation tears things down. But the atmosphere wasn't like that on early Earth. It wasn't an oxidizing atmosphere. Indeed, there was little, if any, oxygen at all. The early Earth was much, much different. The early Earth's atmosphere was composed of gases very different than what we see today. Research indicates it was full of materials more inclined to engage in reduction, building up, rather than oxidation, tearing down, such as nitrogen, ammonia, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, methane, and hydrogen. The reducing atmosphere of the early Earth was then ripe for reactions where simple molecules could be turned into more complex ones. At this stage is when it is suggested organic molecules formed. The reducing atmosphere would have favored reactions that build, but since this would involve an endergonic reaction, the laws of thermodynamics require a source of energy for this reaction to occur. In our bodies, the energy we release from food during respiration is the source of energy we use to build and repair body structures and materials. With nothing alive back in the early Earth, this was not a possibility, but there were still sources of energy. Ultraviolet, UV light, not good for genes, but a source of high energy and much more prevalent on the early Earth due to a lack of ozone, which filters out much of the damaging UV rays today. Ozone is a type of oxygen, O3, and so of course would not have been around back then, allowing considerably more UV to strike the Earth's surface than does now. You get a suntan because of your body's response to increased UV exposure. This increased UV energy could have driven some of these endergonic reactions. Lightning occurs due to friction between atmospheric particles, whether that be water or volcanic ash. Volcanic eruptions back then, as well as now, can trigger lightning strikes. Geothermal vents and hot sand, clay, or rock, which we will discuss in a minute. We have a fairly decent idea of what the early Earth was like, so if this is just chemistry, would it be possible to mimic those early conditions with a scientific experiment and create life? Well, maybe not life, but the precursors to it. Let's look at one such experiment. One of the beauties of this experimental setup is its simplicity. Everything you see there is very common organic chemistry labware. The intent is to mimic certain conditions on the early Earth, such as the atmospheric chemical makeup reducing, the oceans evaporating water vapor into the atmosphere, and a source of energy, in this case the electrodes to stimulate lightning. Allowing this closed apparatus to run through many cycles of evaporation and condensation has been demonstrated to produce, right at the bottom of the slide, small organic molecules. Nice! But even better, including amino acids. Remember, it's those 20 or so amino acids that allow all the different kinds of proteins living organisms can make. Think amino acids, variation, Darwinian evolution. This is known as the Miller-Urey experiment after the first two investigators to try it out and was conducted over 50 years ago. Since then, our knowledge of organic chemistry has grown, making this suggestion even more plausible. But there are other equally as reasonable theories of where this non-living to living process occurred. One are at those geothermal vents I mentioned earlier. Geothermal vents occur deep in the ocean and were only recently discovered in the 1970s. They exist because cracks in the rocks on the ocean floor allow seawater to penetrate down until it contacts hot magma, which is fairly close to the surface in these areas. The hot magma immediately vaporizes the liquid water, sending out a steam plume like you see in the picture. The idea is perhaps it was in these areas of the early Earth where this occurred. The steam plumed and surrounding ocean water would provide plenty of molecular building blocks, including carbon. The heat of the steam could have provided the energy, as we discussed, for turning smaller, simpler molecules into larger, more complex ones. There are also theories which suggest life on Earth or the precursors may have had extraterrestrial origins. Since organic molecules and even amino acids are believed to exist on asteroids and comets, the theory of panspermia says these interplanetary travelers would have seeded the cosmos with simple life forms, prokaryotes, or precursors of such. These extraterrestrial origins of Earth life have gained increasingly more attention lately as we find out other conditions in the universe and even our solar system where life or its beginnings may or could theoretically exist. Once the Earth reached the point of creating some simple and relatively smaller organic molecules, and simply following the same rule that monomers lead to polymers requires energy would follow. With the amount of volcanic activity, which we will discuss a few more times, there was no shortage of places that were hot. Even today, when lava flows into the ocean, we might imagine a scenario where an organic rich soup of ocean water splashed up onto, maybe not hot lava, but warm sand or clay. Heat is not a particularly effective form of energy, but it will do the trick of sticking monomers together. It's even been demonstrated possible in a laboratory setting. We're at the point now we have organic macromolecules. In the liquid soup they were in, some of these really special organic molecules might have begun to engage in very simple metabolic reactions. Not because they were alive, but because these molecules use the laws of chemistry to do some work, much like the laws of chemistry allow you to enjoy a warm campfire. These very simple metabolic reactions may have involved turning larger molecules to smaller. Remember again the laws of thermodynamics. Larger into smaller would be an exergonic reaction and not require, but release energy, which can be used to build up other structures that require endergonic reactions to occur, and so on. What you see here, too, has been demonstrated in a lab setting. The creation of a liposome is a natural reaction of amphipathic molecules like phospholipids to a water environment. That is, they make spheres. The outer layer of these non-living liposomes can also be selectively permeable and is arranged in a bilayer. All this, I hope, sounds familiar from your Bio 1 discussion on cell membranes. These liposomes can also produce others, as you see in the picture. Although labeled as such, we certainly wouldn't call this reproduction in the living organism sense of the word. Finally, by adding just a few simple enzymes, phosphorylase and amylase in red, these liposomes can engage in very simple metabolic reactions as diagrammed here. This is where this abiotic collection of molecules becomes the model cell or protocell. What this investigation tells scientists is that given the right conditions, water, amphipathic molecules, and some very simple organic molecules, the enzymes, these protocells can mimic living organism metabolism in a very crude sense. It is thought the formation of these protocells increased the efficiency of these reactions as it increased the chances of substrates and enzymes mixing and reacting in the more confined environment. Certainly, this is quite a long way from the entity we call a true living cell with all the characteristics of life we know. But given this as a possible start, and then billions of years of evolution, it becomes quite plausible. One of the interesting bits of side data to protocell formation is illustrated in this graph. In a lab setting, if something known as montmorillonite clay is added to a mixture of those abiotically produced amphipathic molecules, the rate of protocell formation and concentration of precursor molecules increases exponentially. It just so happens montmorillonite clay comes from the weathering of volcanic ash. In the early Earth, there was lots of volcanic activity. Lots. The picture in the lower right will transition nicely to the last step in this very much abbreviated list of the steps in Earth biogenesis. The orange in that photo is RNA, which has been clumped together due to the presence of montmorillonite clay. This clay could have been instrumental in concentrating organic molecules together, again increasing the chances they will react. We also know certain RNA molecules can act as catalysts, enzymes, known as ribozymes. Thus, we can imagine a situation where advantageous molecules like those ribozymes would have been favored. Think similar to Darwinian evolution at a very basic molecular level. Therefore, whatever protocell could attract more of these ribozymes from the surrounding soup of molecules due to the presence of this clay, the greater its advantage would be. The RNA world hypothesis states the first genetic molecule was RNA, not DNA. As we saw in the last slide, these RNA molecules had jobs quite different from the mRNA, rRNA, and tRNA you learned about in Bio 1. These RNA molecules not only can act as enzymes, thereby carrying on something akin to metabolism, but they can be changed, with these modifications being passed on to subsequent RNA molecules since they copy through self-replication. In a quick recap then, life on Earth began with the formation or arrival of organic molecules. Organic molecules grew into bigger and more complex molecules using energy from the environment, hot rocks, lightning, etc. Packaging units, known as protocells, and the collection of organic molecules like ribozymes, enhanced due to clay from the weathering of volcanic ash, allowed basic metabolic reactions to occur. And ribozymes are capable of self-replication. Changes can be introduced and are passed on, inherited in subsequent molecules.